girls who transition are victims, boys who transition are victimizers.
Yeah, again, I mean, I'm writing quite a bit about the trans issue, and again, I don't really, I don't consider myself an expert in any way. I haven't done deep reading or, interviewed people or anything like that. But I just, again, it's so striking. In this case, it was just such a clear illustration of Glenn Poole, I think, is the originator of the term, the gender empathy gap, or he, I think, just called it the empathy gap. And he was talking, that's an old article and I can't even find it online anymore, but it's probably close to 8 or 10 years old now. He was talking there about the way that our whole society, all our societies, Western societies, continually reshape reality. He was looking especially at newspaper reporting and how anything that portrays men as perpetrators of evil, or violence, whatever, the men will be identified as men. So it reinforces this public perception that that's what men are about. Men are problems. Anything in which men are suffering, if it's a report of men dying in some horrible, mining accident, or men being harmed as a result of some phenomenon, they won't be referred to as people. They won't be referred to as men in that case, or men and boys. They'll be referred to only as people. So he was just making that, it's obvious once you know it, but I think it is invisible to a lot of readers, consumers of mainstream news. So you never have the emphasis on men and boys when it's a story about harms and suffering. So it leaches empathy away from men and boys, but it puts animus towards men and boys by always identifying them if they're perpetrators. The opposite, of course, is true for women and girls. If women and girls are being harmed, that is news, and they will be identified as female, because their suffering matters, and it will be reinforced that matters. Whereas if they're the perpetrator, often they will be referred to as people. And it's true, like it's shocking that the almost unconsciously, it seems, reporters will switch to the gender neutral if a group of women has done something wrong, whereas when a group of men has done something good or they've been harmed by something, then they get switched to people. So, and I saw this to some extent in this discussion between Abigail Schreier and Candace Owens. It's an old interview now, but I just came across it. I forget why I was looking at. I think somebody recommended Abigail Schreier's book to me, and the book is called Irreversible Damage: How the Transgender Mania, I think is the word she used.
Irreversible Damage: The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters.
Yeah, how the transgender craze.
Daughters, who cares about the sons,
Right, and that, and actually the way I first got onto this, thinking about this, was that Jordan Peterson had been talking in a recent video about how he was banned from Twitter for one of his mean tweets. That was the title of his video, and it was about this person, and I didn't even know about this person. I'm kind of out of it when it comes to popular culture, but Elliot Page, who was Ellen Page, and who had all these pictures that were published with her breasts removed, and so and Jordan expressed his worry about what he called this psychogenic phenomenon that's affecting girls, adolescent girls. And always my radar goes off. Okay, is it only girls? Are there really no young boys? And of course, I think what's generally understood is that for a long time, when children at a very young age believed themselves to be in the wrong body, it was overwhelmingly boys that this happened to.
Yeah.
Now, and maybe there was expressions of concern about it then, but I never heard anything about it. Now it is affecting more girls at a slightly later age, at adolescence. I don't know exactly, maybe 10, 11, that sort of age. Although certainly even younger children are being encouraged to consider themselves potentially trans, and that's being taught in the schools and everything else. And it is a real concern, and I agree with people that are raising alarms about it. I don't think 6-year-olds should be encouraged to wonder whether they're actually the opposite sex, and be taking hormone blockers and considering surgeries and all these things. So, but then, yeah, the focus only on girls. So I looked into it a bit. Again, I'm not an expert, but it's about 80% girls that this is affecting at adolescence. So that's still 20% boys. And it is absolutely unimaginable that any other issue that affected 80% boys and 20% girls, if it were reversed, it's unimaginable that that issue would be discussed exclusively as a boys issue.
Right. No, there's that whole, 1 out of 4 women are homeless kind of a deal. So they'll probably still
1 out of 5, I think it is. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's 80% men. Yeah, you're right. 75 to 80% men are homeless. Right, exactly. And that's always, I mean, I've read lots of articles on teen suicide where nobody disagrees with the fact that it's 80% male, and yet it often is about a girl. And often the picture on the front, if it's a website or whatever, shows a girl with tears running down, her eyes. We're told over and over again that girls attempt suicide more often. Sometimes you have to read through to the very bottom of the article to realize that, yes, girls attempt suicide more often, but boys complete suicide far more often. And the girls attempting is clearly a cry for help because they believe that help might well be forthcoming, whereas the boys don't cry for help because they don't believe any help is going to come forward. They just kill themselves, and this indicates a real crisis that needs to be addressed. And yet, yeah, all you hear about is girls and their suicidality and their fantasies. So, yeah, I mean, and again, I don't suggest that anybody discussing teen suicide should ignore the girls. I would like an honest discussion of the numbers and recognition that it affects both girls and boys in different ways. But you don't find that with the trans phenomenon, and that was so striking. All this discussion about what we're doing to girls, never a mention of the boys and whether they have any similar, like parallel types of issues. And this interview between Candace Owens and Abigail Schreier, which took place even before the book came out. So it's from June 2019. It's an old interview now, but it's like a textbook case of the gender empathy gap. Boys are not even mentioned when the concern is the harm that's being done to young people. They're not, they don't even, I don't think the word boy is mentioned once. Occasionally they'll say young people. Yeah. But whenever they specify, it's always girls. And they took this kind of feminist approach that it's because supposedly girls aren't being affirmed, in their girlhood. Right.
It assumes the default assumption that boys are all catered to. We just have this great patriarchal life. I think I missed out, but
I know. I mean, it was incredible to hear these two women, and I like both of them. I don't know Abigail Schreier, but I like Candace Owens, a lot of stuff that she says. But there she was, and she even slipped into this feminist lingo. She was talking about how girls aren't being affirmed in our society, and this is the patriarchy rolling back the gains that women have made. Women fought for 100 years for equality. Now it's being rolled back because now you have men invading girls' sports. And they switched it over in that way so that it's men, not even boys, invading girls' sports. So the only discussion of the male phenomenon of wanting to transition becomes then the discussion of predators, and it went seamlessly into that. All these horrible predators usurping girls' bodies, usurping girls' spaces, etc., etc. And wow, it was just incredible. Not a single mention of the at least 2 decades, and especially over the last 10 to 15 years, utter unmitigated assault on masculinity. The countless public programs telling boys they're no good, you're toxic, your masculinity is dangerous,
Right.
step back, ban bossy, girls should take over. Why can't we hate men? Why I hate men? All of that, Me Too, that whole thing that's been going on. They didn't mention it once. They never once thought, what about these boys? Maybe they are not being affirmed in their
Exactly.
masculinity. Maybe
Yeah.
they are being affected by all
Right.
this negativity, and that's why they don't want to be masculine anymore. That's why they want to transition.
That's probably why. Yeah. I mean, they're told that their masculine biology is dangerous. Like these conservatives are using stuff straight out of the radical feminist or
Yeah.
just normal feminist playbook. And here's the thing. It's just a talking point to rally against men, because if they really believe that biological men are dangerous, why would any women intrude on men's spaces? Because that's like a complete, free for all if that were true, right? I mean,
Right. Yes.
yeah, like because they enter men's locker rooms, the press, women press kind of go in there. They sometimes use the men's restroom, and then in that case, men are supposed to avert their eyes if the women have to use the men's room. So the women are getting a taste of what the men have been getting for some time now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the lack of any kind of parallel concern. Like, there's never a suggestion that what's it like for the guys who are having women invading their space. Is there a single guy that might feel really uncomfortable as a result? Do the guys get to express any kind of opposition to this invasion of their spaces? Of course, we've seen over the last, I don't know how many decades, that that's what the feminist movement has been about. It's about closing down male-only spaces. If there's a male-only barber shop, well, somebody will bring a lawsuit against it so that it has to admit women, which, as you say, it doesn't really make sense. If these spaces are so toxic and horrible, why would any woman want to go into that space? Well, clearly they aren't toxic and horrible, but they have to be destroyed anyway, because men aren't allowed to have their own spaces, and they're not allowed to protect their own spaces. Any clubs that men used to gather in, all of that, I think pretty much entirely has been outlawed. Professions that used to be 100% male are no longer. Men simply have to accept that as a reality. And so, yeah, none of it makes sense in terms of the kind of assertions of toxic masculinity that feminists are always making, but they're able to make them because it's part of the culture. And yeah, even conservatives who claim that they're anti-feminist fall into all these kinds of feminist assumptions. Yeah, it's
Exactly. They completely
yeah.
white knight for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, male feminists do, or male non-feminist, male conservatives do, and these two women certainly did. They fell into that right away, and not an ounce of compassion or interest was expressed in understanding why a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old boy might decide that he really didn't want to be a boy. And are they really, they claim to be anti-feminist, but then at the same time they expect that feminism is about standing up for women, which they don't seem to understand. It hasn't been about that ever, and certainly
Yeah.
not in the last 50 years. And it seems
Exactly.
to me that, again, feminist ideology is largely responsible, I would say, or has to take on its responsibility for the trans phenomenon, not only because of the denial of the biological basis of gender, but because it has really pushed this idea of the moral superiority of certain categories of being. And first it was that women were morally superior to men, but then that soon, that fell away, and intersectionality was introduced. And so then we had that black was superior to white, and then we had that gay was superior to straight, and now we have definitely trans is superior to cisgender. And
Sure.
and the bit that I've read about the reasons that girls give for wanting to become trans is that being cisgender, they have already picked up on that, the feminist idea that somehow being cisgender means you are oppressive. It means that you have to apologize for your existence, just as men have had to apologize for their existence for so many years, according to feminist ideology. So now this is how girls are responding. If it means I can escape from that oppressor identity, especially if they're white girls, I'm sure they feel it very intensely. Because as we saw with the whole Karen movement and everything else, being a white woman is not very good anymore. White women have lost their position of power within the whole feminist intersectionality scheme. So I think probably white girls are thinking, how can I escape from this horrible burden of collective guilt that my teachers and my culture are telling me I have to bear? Just as white boys have felt that for many, many years. And it's all as a result of the, hideous ideology of intersectional feminism.
Exactly.